Hello, everyone. The next session is titled Campus Free Speech Around the World. In this session, Sarah McLaughlin from FIRE will explain the importance of free speech and the challenges that face students today. Please welcome Sarah to stage. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Sarah McLaughlin. I work at FIRE. So if you haven't heard of FIRE before, we defend student and faculty rights on US campuses. So today I'm going to be talking with you about campus free expression and how it changes across the world and in the United States. So our work on US campuses changes from policy reform to help students have codes of conduct that are more respective of their free speech rights, to litigation at public universities that violate the First Amendment, and to our student network, where we help student activists campaign for their rights and host events on their campus that spread free speech. So I work in FIRE's Individual Rights Defense Program, which works directly with students and faculty that have been censored, and we help them defend their rights and retain their rights and fix whatever punishment they're facing. So I want to talk a little bit more about what it's like abroad and how most of the world is not lucky enough to have a First Amendment where they will have their rights respected and they have recourse if they're censored somehow. So Turkey is right now one of the world's worst jailers of journalists, one of the most repressive countries when it comes to free speech. So since 2016, essentially, Turkey has been in a widespread crackdown. And since universities are usually hotbeds of political activism, university members have experienced that crackdown. Faculty especially have been a target of Turkey's President Erdogan, especially faculty members who have protested the country's treatment of Turkish groups. There's a widespread peace petition that hundreds of Turkish academics signed, and because of that, they were accused of supporting terrorism, of insulting the government, and hundreds of them have been jailed, they've been put on trial, they've been forced to leave the country just because they engaged in basic political expression. And this has been happening with increasing frequency since the failed coup attempt in 2016. Since then, the government has been firing thousands of professors, university deans, that they accuse of somehow taking part in plotting to overthrow the government or supporting terrorism. And unfortunately, students have not been free of this either. So students have been facing a lot of the same issues as faculty members have. So students who are accused of insulting the president, which is actually illegal in Turkey and can earn you years of jail time if you just say you don't like the president of Turkey. They have also been jailed just for taking part in basic protests that we take for granted in the United States. One of my favorite fun facts about Turkey's president is that he actually sued a cartoonist for drawing him as a kitten. So that's like the level of repression that people face in that country. China is, unsurprisingly, another serious violator of student rights. As you probably know, China is one of the most repressive governments when it comes to speech. China's Great Firewall, that's what they call their internet censorship machine, is one of the most advanced and sophisticated in the world. And students who can't engage in basic research online don't have the freedom to study and learn. And student activists have been facing a lot of repression in China as well. The Me Too movement in China has been met with censorship by students who are trying to speak about sexual harassment on campuses. They've been put in meetings with professors. They've been suspended or expelled. And China is also currently engaging in a long crackdown on its Muslim community. So there's about 1 million Muslims who are in re-education camps right now in China. And professors are a large part of that because they try to teach about that culture. And this one is surprising to a lot of people, but Marxist students are actually some of the most censored in China because they talk a lot about student rights, and they talk a lot about workers' rights. China does not appreciate that. That's not something they want anyone to talk about because of the human rights violations that workers experience. So there are actually a number of Marxist student activists that are still missing in China. The government is disappearing them, and their friends and family don't know where they are. Another interesting case is Israel. There was actually a US student who was detained at the border in Israel because she took part in Students for Justice in Palestine in the United States. So she was part of a BDS campaign, and because of that, she wasn't allowed to enter Israel. And that was causing people to ask a lot of questions about political freedom for students planning to study in Israel and what kind of political activity they can actually get into and whether they can even enter the country. So I have a few other countries that I just want to gloss over just so you have an understanding of how widespread these problems are. So in Brazil, for example, last year, police were entering universities, taking anti-fascist banners, investigating professors for what they taught, what they said about the government, about police. And drug research is a serious issue in Brazil, and faculty have been taken in for questioning just for what they research. Hong Kong, as I discussed in China, the issues are bleeding into there as well. And students who advocate for a free Hong Kong have been facing like a years-long censorship battle with administrators about whether or not they're allowed to advocate for a free Hong Kong. And unsurprisingly, Hong Kong's government does not think they should be allowed to do that. And just another example, in the past couple weeks, the University of Liberia banned all political activity. So that says a lot about how free a country is. If students aren't allowed to engage in political expression, just like a basic speech that we all enjoy, that says a lot about how unfree the country is. And so this is the same case around the world. Most countries have some degree of censorship. Even in the United States, there's censorship. But it's really striking to see how unfree so many students are and how many students can't engage in basic activism that we can enjoy here. So I want to talk about what role American universities play in this. Higher education is it's global. It doesn't take place in just one country, and education occurs across borders. That's a good thing. I think we can learn better when we meet people with different ideas from different places, and we can share our experiences. However, these international agreements that universities have and students' efforts to study across borders raise serious questions about free expression on US campuses and how that translates around the world. So the first university I want to talk about is Georgetown University in Qatar. So GUQ has very strong free speech promises. They say they're a university where open discourse and free speech are allowed and encouraged. But some recent events raise questions about how real those promises are. So back in October, the university's debating union tried to hold a discussion about whether or not God should be perceived as a woman. I think there's a popular song about that. I don't know. But these students were told they couldn't have the event. It caused a huge backlash on social media. It actually provoked the hashtag Georgetown insults God. It was not popular to a lot of residents of the country. And the university shut down the event, and they said, a comment that we hear a lot at FIRE, the event wasn't sanctioned, which is an administrative favorite go-to about shutting down an event and excusing it. But they later gave another comment that kind of revealed their intentions. And they said that it created a safety risk for the academic community. And they said that while the university is committed to the free and open exchange of ideas, they encourage civil dialogue that respects the laws of Qatar. And so that's the important thing. How can you have real free expression and open discourse in a place where basic debates about God are not allowed? Qatar has a blasphemy law where you could go to prison if you, in the eyes of the government, blaspheme God. So how can you have a free and open exchange of ideas where you can't even talk about God without maybe going to jail? New York University, Abu Dhabi is another example. NYU AD has been at the center of controversy for a number of years since it opened this campus. The UAE is a known human rights abuser, and there have been serious human rights abuses in the country for a long time. And faculty members, when the campus was being opened, expressed concerns about how those human rights abuses might play out on their campus. So in just the past few years, multiple NYU faculty members have actually been rejected from entering the country by the government. An interesting one professor claimed that she was eventually allowed to teach there, but she was followed by government officials who were rummaging through her office when she wasn't there. And last year, 2 professors were rejected visas for the UAE, and they believe it's primarily because their religious views are disfavored. So again, you have NYU promising that there will be academic freedom and free expression on their satellite campus in the UAE, but how is that even possible where the government won't let you into the country because of what you think? And back in 2015, the UAE rejected another professor, Andrew Ross, because he had written about the human rights abuses in the use of migrant labor to build the campus. And as I was discussing with China earlier, Cornell University actually found what was going on there so disturbing that they abandoned their relationship with a Chinese university because it was surveilling and punishing student activists. And Cornell believed that it couldn't protect the rights of its students while they were on that campus. So now we have to ask ourselves, is there a solution? And like most complex problems, there isn't really an easy solution, but there are things students and universities can do to try to address what's happening. So the first thing is what you yourself can do as students. If you plan on studying abroad, that's great, and you should pursue it, but you should figure out what your rights will be when you're studying abroad. There are some countries where the way you express yourself, what you believe, and your political opinions might not be legal, and that's something you need to consider. It's really important that you do your research and you carefully consider what your rights will be and whether you might actually face punishment for your speech abroad, because your rights in the United States will not be the same rights elsewhere. The most important thing, and probably the most difficult, is that universities need to commit to protecting the rights of their student and faculty members in these international agreements on satellite campuses, and need to come up with plans for what they will do if those rights are violated. So for example, there was a UK student who was actually jailed for almost a year on spying charges, clearly false charges, in the UAE, and the student was from Durham University, and the university had to consider what it would do to protect its students and what they would do to change their relationship with the UAE until their student was released. And another thing that that universities can do that I think is the most important is they need to tell students in writing what's going to happen to them when they study abroad. So if you're going to study in the UAE on a US-owned campus, I think your university should provide to you a list of the speech restrictions you're likely to face abroad so you can make an informed decision about whether or not it's the right choice for you. I think universities owe it to their students to be honest and transparent about the legal restrictions abroad. Something FIRE is working on is actually a new commitment that we launched this week that we're encouraging students and faculty like yourselves to ask their universities to sign on. So it's a commitment to protecting free expression on US campuses and on their campuses abroad. So universities will promise to consider the speech rights of their students and faculty when they make these agreements, and that they'll promise that they will take those commitments seriously and that they won't put money or prestige ahead of the rights of their community members. So I think we'll have a few minutes for questions if you guys want. And if you want to stop by FIRE's table later and sign up for our student network, learn what resources we have available, if you could stand up if you have a question, that would be great. Sure.
Why is this Professor Ross a critic? Oh, sorry. Why is this Professor Ross a critic of the using of migrant labor to build the campus?
I believe that he felt that there were serious human rights abuses that were occurring, like workers are being forced to work extreme hours without food or water, and that there were human rights violations occurring during the building of that campus. Do we have any other questions?
I personally feel that we're starting this kind of cycle in campuses in the US. Do you have an opinion on the degrading, I guess like the whole like safe space issue happening in American campuses?
Sure, so the safe space issue is tough. You know, in some ways it's a free association question, so students have the right to you know, create what some people might refer to as safe spaces. So if they want to have a group where you just discuss, you know, Christian theology, or like you just talk about, you know, a certain cause that you all agree with, that's fine. You know, students should be able to freely associate. A useful analogy is that safe spaces should be a shield, not a sword. So the problem is when students want the spaces they create to be more than just for themselves, and they want, for example, the entire community to have to abide by certain rules that they create. And that's, you know, where it becomes problematic, when students try to enforce rules that they want to live by and ideologies they want to support on the rest of the community. So like looking at it as a shield rather than a sword to use on others, I think is the right way to see it.
Hi, sorry, I did come in a bit late. My name is Porter, and I go to Georgia State University.
Okay.
And my campus is starting to use what we call free speech zones.
Sure.
So there are signs, and I just wanted to know what your take was on that in kind of dispersed zones where you're now allowed to have free speech.
So what university was it again?
Oh, Georgia State University.
Okay, so it's a public university.
Yeah, all around the campus, downtown Atlanta. It's in downtown Atlanta, and there's little zones marked off saying free speech zone.
So it depends. Generally, the broad open spaces of campus should be free for students to use without needing permission. They generally shouldn't need to be in a zone. I need to know more of the specifics, but students or non-students? That's interesting. I mean, we'd love to hear about it if you want to send us an email. You know, we only defend the rights of students and faculty, so it's a little bit different for non-students who want to speak on the campus, but we definitely want to hear about it if students are getting in trouble for not speaking in a free speech zone. So my email's up there, definitely reach out.
Hi, so I have two questions. First question is, how rapidly are the climates or relationships with these foreign campuses changing with universities? And then my second question is more about where the legal liability of the university stops both in the US and in these foreign countries.
So I'm going to answer your second question first. It's a really complicated issue, and I would have to see the contractual agreements that these universities are making and who they're with. It's kind of hard to say on like a general basis what kind of legal obligations universities are getting into and what kind of risks they're facing themselves when they make these agreements. And with your first question, I can't really say how many are being opened right now. I can say that right now, a lot of US universities are having a massive reconsideration of their relationship with China, specifically with Confucius Institutes. There have been a number of reports over the past year about how Confucius Institutes might be used to some inappropriate ends to surveil students, to engage in censorship on behalf of the Chinese government on US campuses. And I think at least 5 or 6 US universities have shut down their agreements with China over the past few months. And Cornell as well ended their agreement.
Hi there. My name is Alvaro. I'm a second-year student American, and I had a quick question regarding the common rhetoric people often I've seen bring up that it's a security issue when you bring certain speakers come in, and they'll cite like the scarce resource. And then apologies if you've been over that. I just want to see your take on that type of argument or rhetoric.
So we see the security issue come up a lot. And that's something we call the heckler's veto, when a university will say people will get mad and they won't like it. So for that reason, we can't allow someone to speak. And it's a little bit different at a private university. It depends on the free speech commitments that university makes. But a public university, just as a rule, cannot say, this speaker's unpopular, people might want to protest, and for that reason, the speaker can speak. The First Amendment explicitly forbids that. Any other questions? Yeah, there have been a number of reports of Chinese students, again, being surveilled for what political activism they engage in within the United States. There was actually a student, I can't remember what school she was at, but in her commencement, at commencement, she spoke about how freeing it was to be in the United States and be able to speak openly, and she actually had to retract the comments she made because her family was getting death threats just because of the comments she made about China. I can't say necessarily how widespread it is. It would be interesting to see polling of Chinese students in the United States and whether they feel safe to speak here. But yeah, I would imagine that a lot of concern Chinese students feel about speaking here is, what realities they would face at home when they go back for what they say here.
When it comes to American campuses, we talk a lot about the First Amendment and how that is kind of the crux of our defense of free speech on public university campuses, and FIRE is part of that, and you talk about that. But given that not every country and all these other countries you're talking about surely don't have anything close to the First Amendment or any constitution like ours, so how do we kind of deal with that almost language barrier of translating our arguments for free speech and particularly for FIRE defending the rights of students abroad if they don't go back to the First Amendment like they do in the context of the United States?
It's especially difficult, and it's something we deal with at private universities who don't have the First Amendment. We still try to make the case, and the argument we say is that it's just it's necessary for human dignity to be able to speak and think without being controlled for it or punished for it. Another thing we say is just that regardless of a First Amendment, it's really not possible to learn in an environment where you don't have access to resources that are being controlled, or if you're not allowed to just engage in basic research. So it's a little bit difficult talking across borders about free expression values. But what's interesting, in the new statement FIRE wrote, we specifically didn't mention the First Amendment, and we made it broader because free speech is broader than the First Amendment. Like a lot of ideas about how we should debate, that's not just the First Amendment. The First Amendment is what the government can and can't do, the US government, but free speech as a concept is much broader. Okay, well, I think we're out of time. Thanks for your questions. If you want to stop by FIRE's table, I'll be there if you want to talk more. Thank you.